like you.
What are you, 5? I once read that maraschino cherries stay in your stomach for like 7 years. Or cause cancer, I forget which. Terrible. I'm sorry. I thought you were a crypto bro.
You thought I was a crypto bro?
Yeah, no, I don't know, like a really expensive prostitute.
I'm not a relationship person.
Yeah, I
never been good at that.
Well, how do you know? You've never tried having a relationship or carbs. How do you know it doesn't work for you? Come on, you don't look like a reckless snacker.
Well, thank you.
Hey friends, it's Katie. Welcome back to my channel. There's been a lot of buzz around the movie It Ends With Us, and many of you have been asking if it's actually any good. Some of you are already invested in the story, but haven't even seen the film yet. You're curious because it involves all these Hollywood big names and a lot of drama. Honestly, it can be hard to relate to their level of wealth and influence, but you can still understand the complex issues they're dealing with. The whole situation involves intense fights over everything, like whether there was sexual harassment or not, battles over creative control, disagreements on film edits, just a lot of behind-the-scenes tension. But something we haven't really touched on yet is how critics responded to the movie and how that response ended up being a huge part of the reason why Blake Lively received so much backlash. I realized I've never fully delved into the critics' reactions and how the film's release played a role in sparking this controversy. As for Blake Lively, she wants people to think there was a huge digital campaign manipulating social media, and she's even shared text messages from Jennifer Aniston and Melissa Nathan to suggest there's a coordinated effort happening. But at the core of this story is the fact that a movie came out, and with its premiere, a whole storm of chatter began. It blew up on TikTok, Twitter, Reddit, and Facebook. Plus, Colleen Hoover even started a group where fans discussed the film nonstop.
All this It Ends With Us movie promo is literally making me sick. All this promo is just so unserious for a very, very serious topic.
And it is not the movie for you to don your florals, grab your besties, and go in for a cute little rom-com, okay? Like, take it seriously. This is not a lighthearted movie.
If Justin Baldoni is not the person who he says he is, with all of the charities that he's been involved with, his podcast, and his delicate approach to bringing this hard and difficult story to life. I mean, he's the only one in this press tour who has been putting the spotlight on the real dangers of domestic violence. Come on, you're telling me that the guy that did this interview, you aren't messing with him?
It's too real. And there are too many people that are the real life Lily Blooms of the world that have to deal with that every single day.
I do kind of feel like the press for it though is a bit like, I don't want to say tone deaf, right? But I just feel like I've watched a lot of interviews and stuff, they're not really touching on the domestic violence part, and it makes me worried that people who have went through that will watch this film and don't know that it's about domestic violence, because apparently it doesn't have any trigger warnings at the start, and it probably should.
Does anybody else feel like the trailers, the press, the overall vibe, It Ends With Us, is giving flowers and happiness and chick flick, romantic comedy, everything that this movie is probably not going to be about?
And then it was also in the media because everyone was at the premiere. Clips of the premiere were shown. They were promoting the film. There was tons of interviews coming out. And then on top of that, as the film starts being seen by people,
And then, of course, it was all over the media because everyone was at the premiere. Clips from the event were circulating everywhere, and they were really pushing the film's promotion hard. There were tons of interviews, press coverage, and behind-the-scenes content being released. But as soon as the film started getting into the hands of audiences, people online were quick to share their thoughts. And honestly, the response wasn't great. I'd say it was a mix of reactions. But overall, the film was a mess. A hot mess, actually. Some major critics gave it pretty scathing reviews, and there were some very specific concerns they raised, especially about how domestic violence was portrayed. Beyond that, critics pointed out major flaws in the movie's editing, particularly in its pacing, music choices, and overall structure. The way the story developed, or in some cases didn't develop, left a lot of people frustrated. Going into the premiere, there were really only two possible outcomes for this film. Either it was going to be a massive success, riding on the popularity of Colleen Hoover's book, or it was going to crash and burn under controversy. The book itself had already been polarizing, even though it was widely read. Many people had serious issues with how it handled the topic of domestic violence, with some accusing Hoover of glorifying or romanticizing abuse. And then there was the whole fiasco with the It Ends With Us adult coloring book, which Colleen Hoover promoted about a year before the film's release. That move alone sparked outrage, as many saw it as completely inappropriate given the book's subject matter. So, from the beginning, marketing this film was already a challenge. It wasn't a lighthearted rom-com. It wasn't a traditional drama. It didn't fit neatly into any genre, making it a tough sell from a promotional standpoint. But what really pushed the online conversation into overdrive was the film's critical reception. This is where Blake Lively's backlash comes in. She insists that much of the criticism she's received was fueled by an orchestrated digital smear campaign. But the reality is that major film critics, who have nothing to do with social media trends, had their own fair share of negative feedback. Outlets like The Hollywood Reporter weighed in, and they weren't exactly kind. In an article published on August 20th, they argued that films should take cues from TV shows when it comes to providing trigger warnings. The piece was written by an executive director from the Network of Victim Recoveries in D.C., a group that advocates for survivors of domestic violence. Their main criticism? The film glossed over the serious nature of domestic violence in its marketing. There were no content warnings, no disclaimers, no acknowledgement of the heavy subject matter. This meant that people who hadn't read the book might have gone into the film expecting a romance, only to be blindsided by intense and potentially triggering scenes. The argument was that by failing to provide these warnings, the movie ultimately failed the very survivors it claimed to be advocating for. According to the article, there were no resources shared, no helplines listed, nothing that could have helped someone impacted by the film's themes. So, this idea that Blake Lively was only being targeted because of social media manipulation, it just doesn't hold up. Even if there was some sort of digital push against her, which, to be clear, I don't believe there was, it wouldn't have influenced major media outlets and experts who specialize in this field. And then there's the Associated Press, one of the largest and most widely respected news organizations. Their review of the movie was downright brutal. The critic, Mark Kennedy, had some major issues with the film, particularly with how it tried to blend different genres. He described it as attempting to balance domestic violence awareness, romantic comedy elements, and female empowerment all at once, yet failing in every category. He argued that the film fell into melodrama, tackling heavy themes like suicide, homelessness, generational trauma, child loss, and unintended pregnancy, but never fully developing any of them. Ultimately, Kennedy's take was that there were too many themes crammed into the story, and none of them were given the depth they deserved. And honestly, that criticism sums up a lot of what went wrong with the movie. It lacked substance beneath the surface, making it feel hollow despite the weight of its themes. There are warning signs about Ryle, but they're subtle. So subtle, in fact, that you don't fully recognize them until they're all pieced together, which can take years. Credit to the filmmakers for not making the potential abuser so blatantly obvious from the start. But one of the major criticisms of the film was how long it took to get to that realization. The story presents him as a romantic lead at first, which makes the shift feel drawn out. His dynamic with Lillian Atlas in the film also differs from the book, which completely changes the tone. The book never positioned it as a love triangle, yet the film leans into that idea. Yes, Ryle was jealous in the story, but that wasn't the main conflict. It was never about competing love interests. One review highlighted that the most impactful aspect of It Ends With Us was the lingering effects of domestic violence and how it affects those who experience or witness it. The film could have emphasized this more effectively. Justin Baldoni manages to balance menace and charm, finding that fine line between assertive and dangerously unstable. His direction was praised for keeping scenes tight and moving the plot forward smoothly. However, one major critique was the overuse of musical montages, which many found unnecessary. And here's the thing, Baldoni didn't even make that choice. He wasn't responsible for the film's music direction. That was Blake Lively. The same goes for the overall rom-com vibe, which was not part of Baldoni's vision. It was a shift that happened after Blake joined the project. So while the director is getting flack for certain creative decisions, many of those weren't actually his. Because his name is on the film as director, he's taking the heat for elements, like pacing, music, and editing, that were ultimately controlled by Lively. Critics pointed out that the film dragged on for too long, had poor pacing, relied on too many unnecessary musical interludes, and, most importantly, misrepresented the story's tone. Now, let's look at how Lively herself was reviewed. 1. Critic described her performance as fine, but noted that she came dangerously close to the manic pixie dream girl trope with her cute flower sketches and love of shabby chic aesthetics. However, they did acknowledge that she improved toward the end of the film. There were also some strange script choices, like a line where Alyssa tells Lily, "The man runs through women like candy." It felt outdated and clunky, but the review did praise some changes from the book, like shifting Lily's dad's funeral into a flashback instead of an odd rooftop scene. Still, the biggest complaint was that the movie was simply too long, over 2 hours, with poor editing choices, sudden scene jumps, and moments that left viewers confused about where they were in the story. This was something I personally struggled with while watching the film. Some scenes felt like they belonged in a cheesy 1990s rom-com, complete with karaoke, drinking, and dancing, all meant to build up the romance. But then there were moments that were so abruptly cut and stitched together that they felt completely disjointed. 1 second, Lily and Ryle are kissing, and then suddenly we're in a domestic violence scene. But it's not even clear that he hit her at first. The way these moments were framed was confusing for the audience. The film made it seem like their bodies just collided accidentally, and only at the very end do we find out that he had actually been abusive multiple times. That should have been a pivotal moment, but instead, it felt like the rug was pulled out from under the audience in a way that was jarring and ineffective. In the book, Lily has more agency. She recognizes what's happening, and Ryle actively seeks help for his behavior. But the movie strips away that part of the story, making it seem like she's oblivious to the warning signs when she actually isn't in the book. Another review even questioned things like how Lily managed to get onto the roof of a luxury high-rise, why Jenny Slate's character was dressed in designer clothes despite working a retail job, and why there was such a heavy focus on wealth and status, from fancy dinners to million-dollar apartments. The review suggested that the film was trying to highlight that domestic violence can happen in any socioeconomic class, but instead, it came across as overly obsessed with portraying luxury lifestyles. Another interesting point was how the film portrayed Lily's romantic interests. The reviewer noted that both Ryle and Atlas looked nearly identical, dark-haired, buff guys with black t-shirts and stubble, making it difficult to even distinguish them in certain scenes. When Lily and Ryle first hook up, she tells him, "Don't let me regret this." The review pointed out the irony. Of course, she will regret it, and so will a few other people involved in this film. That line alone almost foreshadows the disappointment many viewers felt. So, to sum it up, this wasn't a glowing review. It called the movie a cliché, built on top of another cliché, trying to disguise itself as something deeper. The biggest complaints centered around the sloppy editing, inconsistent tone, unnecessary music choices, and the film's excessive length, all elements that fell under Blake Lively's control. And it wasn't just this one review. Another major film site, Pajiba, also had strong criticisms. They outright called the film a tonal mess, arguing that the movie struggled to handle its serious subject matter with the weight it deserved. Their review, published on August 12th, pointed out a major issue with the film's marketing. It was completely misleading. If you watch the trailers, you might think this was a rom-com, which is a huge problem considering the actual plot revolves around a woman falling into a dangerous and abusive relationship. That's not something that should be glossed over or sugar-coated. And this wasn't just a problem with the film. The book itself had the same issue. The reviewer argued that It Ends With Us wanted to be everything at once, steamy and romantic, yet lighthearted and funny. Heart-wrenching, yet filled with quirky in-laws and comedic moments. At the end of the day, the film struggled to balance all these conflicting tones, and that's why so many critics called it out. A subplot about a long-lost teenage love isn't impossible to juggle. If handled well, it could mirror the unpredictable nature of an abusive relationship, where things shift from fine to awful in an instant. But here, just like in the book, it's a mismatched mix of tones that makes the funny moments feel forced, and the serious ones lose their impact. The film struggles to balance its themes, leaving both comedy and drama feeling unconvincing. And the reviews? They don't paint a great picture. These aren't just random online comments. This is actual film criticism. Lively's performance, for instance, doesn't do her any favors. She's a capable actress, and in the right role, she can be excellent. Just look at A Simple Favor, where she thrived in that glossy, rich lady mystery. Here, she has some shining moments, like when she masks fear with a forced smile, but for the most part, she struggles. The biggest issue? The script she rewrote for herself stripped away the layers of Lily's character, leaving her feeling hollow. She's just a woman enduring pain, but there's little sense of who she is beyond that. The book was flawed, but at least it developed Ryle in a way that made him complex. He was dangerous, yet charming. The movie barely manages that. His character is more compelling to watch than Atlas, whose performance falls flat. The problem is that the film feels unsure of what it wants to be. One moment, it's a glossy romance. The next, it's a serious drama. The emotional weight gets lost in the shuffle, making it hard to connect with the story in a meaningful way. And let's talk about the way the movie was put together. The editing? Choppy. The music? Out of place. The pacing? Way too long. And guess who made those choices? Blake Lively. She was the one who pushed for a rom-com vibe, added unnecessary banter, and leaned into quirky moments that didn't fit the story's serious themes. The result? A film that feels all over the place, unable to handle its own subject matter with the depth and sensitivity it deserves. Then there's the marketing. If you saw the trailers and assumed this was a fun romantic drama, you weren't alone. That's exactly how it was packaged. But the story itself is about domestic violence, a heavy, serious issue that deserved to be handled with care. Instead, the film's glossy aesthetic, its overemphasis on romance, and its disjointed storytelling left audiences feeling frustrated. Survivors of abuse, the very people who might have connected with Lily's journey, were left feeling unseen. And that's a massive problem. Now, instead of addressing the film's actual flaws, the conversation has shifted. It's no longer about the messy storytelling, the uneven pacing, or the way the subject matter was mishandled. Instead, it's about a supposed feud between Lively and Baldoni. She wants to frame the production as chaotic, blaming him for the issues. He, on the other hand, insists it was all about creative differences. But the truth is, if the movie had been better, if it had been handled with more care, none of this drama would even be happening. The reality is, this wasn't a well-made film. It had mixed reviews from audiences and got called out by critics for its lack of depth. The story had potential, but poor creative choices smothered it. And the biggest issue? It failed the very people it should have been speaking to. Those who have lived through the kind of pain Lily experiences. That's the real failure here. From the very start, this project was a mess. Blake Lively had her hands all over it, shaping it into something completely different from the original vision. But even if you removed her from the equation, heck, even if you removed Justin Baldoni, the movie was bound to fail critically no matter what. The real issue? The book itself. Colleen Hoover's writing is problematic, her characters are problematic, and the way she portrays abusers is downright troubling. Lily's story, for example, has so many gaps. She never goes to the police, never files a report. The book gives this unrealistic impression that joint custody is just the default even in domestic violence cases. There's barely any focus on therapy, getting help, or accessing real resources, which isn't the reality for most survivors. And what's missing entirely, the real danger women face when they do leave. The book's foundation is flawed, so no matter who adapted it, the movie was always going to be met with mixed reactions. If you really want to understand why this film was doomed from the start, you have to go straight to the source, the book and its author, Colleen Hoover. She made the choice to tell the story this way. And while Justin Baldoni saw something powerful in it, a lot of readers didn't. By the time this movie went into production, the growing frustration toward Hoover had already hit a boiling point. The moment the film was released, it entered an environment that was already hostile. For years, TikTok was flooded with videos calling out Hoover, canceling her over and over again. So between that, changes to the book, the way the characters were portrayed, and how the whole thing was handled, backlash was inevitable. This was a film destined to be controversial no matter what. But Blake Lively made the choice to take control, to shape the film in her vision. And there's plenty of footage to prove just how deeply involved she was. She took full ownership of these creative decisions, so when the criticism started rolling in, it was hers to own. that's just part of the job. If you take over a project, even if you're not technically the director, you're responsible for both the success and the failure. Just listen to how she talked about the movie at a pre-screening. She told fans, "You'll have to forgive a few things. You might see tape on the walls, the music isn't finalized, the score isn't done, but overall, it's the movie." Then she urged them to watch it again in August, promising it would be even better. She was nervous but excited, and she made it clear this was her movie. She even admitted the studio had been pushing back, telling her not to show the unfinished version to the audience. But she went ahead and did it anyway, screening an incomplete film to over 2,500 fans at Book Bonanza. She acknowledged that changes were still needed. CGI fixes, improved music, edits to smooth things out. Throughout the press tour, she kept making jokes, obsessing over Brandon's butt, making him show it off in every single theater they visited. But here's the thing, when the film was finally released and people started criticizing the messy editing, the awkward music choices, the badly timed romance montages, the sloppy transitions between scenes, those weren't just random complaints, those were her choices. And if she was the one calling the shots, then the responsibility falls on her. She wanted to take over, and with that comes the weight of the criticism, especially when the final product doesn't deliver. So, what did you think of the film? Did you watch it? Were you a Colleen Hoover fan before? Or did this movie change your opinion? Would you ever buy or read another one of her books after this? And knowing how this adaptation turned out, would you even consider watching her next? 1. This whole thing isn't just about online drama or some bot farm. It's about real criticism of a film that just wasn't well made. So, let's talk about it. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear what you think. And before you go, don't forget, 60% of you watching right now aren't subscribed yet. If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button on your way out, give it a like, and let's keep this conversation going. I always try to respond, so make sure to sound off. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.